Even if Russian history isn't your thing, you've probably heard the Rasputin song. You know, the one that calls him Russia's greatest love machine and the lover of the Russian queen. But how much truth is hidden behind those lyrics? Was Rasputin really what the song says he was? And did Alexandra Fyodorovna deserve that kind of reputation? Let's find out in today's video. Welcome back to Female Tales. I'm Yulia, and together on this channel, we explore the stories of remarkable women from history. If history speaks to you, like the video, join our community, and let's head straight into the depths of the past. On the night of December 29th to 30th, 1916, one of the most hated men in the entire Russian Empire, Grigori Rasputin, was murdered as part of a conspiracy. By the very next day, the news of his death had spread like wildfire and was met with open celebration, not just among the aristocracy, but among ordinary people too. Champagne sold out across the city, and churches were suddenly packed, not with mourners, but with people praying for the health and well-being of his murderers. But there was one place where Rasputin's death was truly mourned. Within the walls of the imperial palace of Tsar Nicholas II. No one was more devastated than Empress Alexandra Fyodorovna herself. She had believed Rasputin to be a holy man, a saint, and 3 days later, she personally attended his funeral, placing an icon into his hands, signed by her and by each of her children. How did it happen that a simple Siberian peasant rose so high that the granddaughter of Queen Victoria would weep over his death? To understand that, we need to go back in time to September 1904 and take a closer look at the personal story of Alexandra and the origins of her bond with Rasputin. In September 1904, the family of the last Russian emperor was shaken and broken by devastating news. The newborn son and long-awaited heir to the throne, Tsarevich Alexei, was diagnosed with haemophilia, a genetic disease that entered the Romanov bloodline through Alexandra herself, who had unknowingly inherited it from her mother, Princess Alice, daughter of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. Through the female descendants of the grandmother of Europe, this illness would quietly infiltrate many of Europe's royal houses, claiming the lives of young boys for generations to come. For Alexandra, this news was a crushing blow. Genetics as a science didn't yet exist, but even then, it was clear that her son's suffering had come from her, and the Tsar's family didn't hesitate to lay the blame at her feet. What made it even worse was the unspoken understanding that this boy would almost certainly be their last child. Alexandra's health could hardly withstand another pregnancy, and Alexei had already been painfully difficult to bring into the world. From the very start of their marriage, she had been expected to produce a male heir, but instead, one after another, daughters were born. First came Olga, and the young couple were genuinely happy. But when Alexandra gave birth to a second girl, Tatiana, she reportedly fell into a hysterical breakdown. After the birth of their third daughter, Maria, even Queen Victoria wrote to her granddaughter, "I regret the third girl for the country." And by the time Anastasia, their fourth daughter, arrived, the disappointment in the family was so palpable, no one even bothered to hide it. Nicholas's sister famously wrote to their mother, "What a disappointment." In her desperation to give birth to a son, Alexandra began searching for any possible solution to ensure one more pregnancy. Suddenly, the court became flooded with so-called mystics, healers, and religious visionaries, most of whom were little more than clever charlatans. But the Empress, deeply distressed, was willing to believe almost anything. At one point, after hearing a prophecy from a French mystic, Alexandra even became convinced that she was pregnant again, and her body responded accordingly. She experienced nausea, her belly grew, but eventually it was revealed to be an extremely rare form of false pregnancy, seen in only one case out of 1,000. Needless to say, when the truth came out, it was yet another devastating blow for a woman already crushed under the weight of reproductive pressure. So when, at last, after 10 long years, the couple finally had their long-awaited son, the one child on whom the hopes of the entire dynasty now rested, his illness divided their lives into before and after. Alexandra became fiercely protective. Once he started walking, every tree in the palace gardens was wrapped in blankets, just in case he fell and hurt himself. His parents ignored his tantrums and outbursts. terrified that he might injure himself in the process. But if you've ever raised a little boy, or honestly, any toddler, you know that bumps and bruises are unavoidable. And of course, Alexei kept getting them while playing. The problem was, in his case, even the tiniest scratch could lead to unstoppable bleeding. He was often confined to bed, recovering from injuries that would have been nothing to another child. At one point, Nicholas II wrote that after a relatively minor accident, Alexei lost an eighth of all the blood in his body, and so began the desperate search for a miracle. And it was during this wave, in 1905, that a man named Grigori Rasputin entered the imperial family's inner circle. A figure so controversial, so strange and complicated, that to this day people can't agree on who he really was. Some see him as the man who helped bring down the monarchy and trigger the Russian Revolution. Others, they want to canonize him. So, who was he really? Let's try to figure that out. Grigori was a simple peasant from the depths of Siberia, a spiritual seeker and self-styled wanderer who spent much of his life on pilgrimages. Many people assume Rasputin was a priest, especially since in some photos he's seen wearing robes that look like religious garb. But in reality, he held no official title, no rank in the church, and called himself a starets, a kind of wandering holy man, claiming to have spiritual insight and a deeper vision of the world. Was any of that true? Honestly, probably not. Most of the so-called miracles he performed were described either by Rasputin himself or his most devoted followers, with little to no actual evidence. But what Rasputin did have was a powerful sense of drama and mystery. He was a master of atmosphere. He'd stare long and hard into someone's eyes, hold a heavy pause, and then deliver some vague prophecy like, "You have an enemy," or "Your life is about to change." Simple, but effective. And paired with his striking appearance, tall, broad-shouldered, intense blue eyes, and a slightly wild look, Rasputin made quite an impression, especially on the aristocrats of St. Petersburg. It was they who first introduced him to the imperial family, and soon enough, Rasputin had them, or rather, the Empress completely under his spell. For one, he was a great storyteller. He knew how to distract the boy during moments of pain with tales from his travels and mystical adventures. But more importantly, he often told the doctors to stop treating the child altogether, and strangely enough, that sometimes helped. You see, in the early 20th century, medicine had no real cure for haemophilia. The doctors could only offer cold compresses and aspirin, which we now know only worsened Alexei's condition by thinning his blood and increasing the risk of internal bleeding. But Rasputin insisted, leave the boy alone, pray, rest. And when the boy's health improved, it felt like a miracle. Of course, today we understand it was probably just coincidence, or at best, the body healing on its own. But back then, to the desperate Romanovs, it was nothing short of divine intervention. Rasputin once told the Empress, "Neither you nor the Tsar can survive without me. If I am not around to protect you, you will lose your son within 6 months." And she believed him. And honestly, it's hard to blame her. Just imagine, you're sitting by your child's bedside night after night, no sleep, and your little boy whispers, "Mama, I'm going to die. Please bury me in the garden." At that point, you'd promise your soul to anyone who could help. In Alexandra's eyes, Rasputin wasn't just a healer, he was a saint. In her letters, she called him friend, always with a capital F, and believed in the holy nature of his powers. As for Tsar Nicholas II, he wasn't nearly as taken in. But like many husbands, he chose a position of diplomatic neutrality in the spiritual matters of his wife. He famously said, "Better 10 Rasputins than one hysterical empress." And all the while, secret police reports about Rasputin's questionable behavior piled up on his desk. There were stories of Rasputin in steam baths with women, appearing naked at restaurants or welcoming strange late-night female visitors to his home. Each time, Rasputin had a clever excuse. He'd fallen asleep or was testing his resistance to sin. Was it real? Or was it a smear campaign by those close to the Romanovs who wanted him gone? To this day, it's hard to say. And maybe future historians will keep digging for answers. Personally, after reading through all the sources, I've come to believe he wasn't magical. Just a master manipulator. A man who could see pain and knew exactly how to play into it. But what about you? Do you think Rasputin had real powers? Was he a saint or a sinner? Let me know what you think in the comments. As Rasputin's influence at court grew stronger, so did the tension across the country. The First World War was dragging on, the empire was crumbling, and public anger was boiling over. It didn't take long before Rasputin became the perfect villain, openly hated, blamed for everything wrong in Russia, and labelled quite loudly as the Empress's secret lover. Newspapers printed vulgar cartoons showing Rasputin and Alexandra in bed, while Nicholas was drawn as a clueless fool in the background. But here's the thing. No one knew about Alexei's illness. It was a tightly kept secret, known only to the innermost circle. Alexandra and Nicholas preferred a very private, withdrawn family life, far away from the traditional court scene. And in the end, that only made things worse. Neither the aristocracy, nor the army, nor ordinary people could understand what this strange peasant was doing so close to the imperial family. So they came up with their own version of events, and Rasputin became the perfect scapegoat, someone they could blame for everything that was going wrong. Rasputin didn't help himself either. He loved boasting about his connections to the family. There were reports of him drunk in public, telling people that Nicholas gave him sexual access to her, and when he showed off shirts embroidered by the Empress, he allegedly sneered, "Sashka did the stitching." Even if it was all just drunken nonsense or crude peasant bravado, it spread like wildfire and destroyed whatever respect he might have had left. As Eugene Botkin, the Romanovs' personal physician, later wrote, "If Rasputin hadn't existed, the people would have invented him, perhaps even out of someone like me." And let's not forget that Alexandra herself, being German, had never been popular at the Russian court, even from the very beginning. Once the First World War broke out, public opinion got even worse. Many believed she was a spy, a traitor, secretly working against Russia. And with Rasputin by her side, it was easy for people to believe they were both secretly manipulating the Tsar and dragging the country into ruin. Ironically, Rasputin was actually against the war. He even claimed that if he hadn't been sick at the time, he would have convinced Nicholas not to go into it at all. And most historians agree that while Nicholas did love his wife and valued her opinion, the idea that he was completely controlled by her, or by Rasputin, is more propaganda than truth. He was the kind of husband who might read her letters filled with Rasputin's advice, then quietly put them in a drawer and carry on doing things his own way. No, Nicholas wasn't a brilliant politician, and yes, he made many mistakes. But had he ruled in a more peaceful time, maybe both he, his family, and the monarchy itself might have survived. The problem was that the Russian Empire was already on fire, torn apart by contradictions that had been building long before Nicholas was born, and he simply didn't have the political instinct or talent to hold it all together. But to get back to the main question of this video, were Alexandra and Rasputin ever lovers? My answer, and the answer of most of her biographers, is a clear no. She loved her husband, and he loved her. She was a mother of 5 children, one of them gravely ill, and spent most of her time caring for them. She herself wasn't in great health either, and by the end of her life, she was often pushed around in a wheelchair. Let's just say it's not the most likely setup for a passionate affair. And most importantly, she was deeply, almost fanatically religious. For her, Alexei and God were the 2 things that connected her to Grigori. Whether that dynamic was healthy or not is something for psychologists to argue over, but what's clear is this. Alexandra has been unfairly vilified by history, and especially by Soviet propaganda. Not long after, a plot to assassinate the uppity peasant, as many saw him, was set in motion by members of the imperial family itself. Leading the conspiracy were Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, a cousin of the Tsar, and Felix Yusupov, the fabulously wealthy husband of Nicholas II's niece. Yusupov later explained their reasoning like this: "In this man lies the root of all Russia's misfortunes. If Rasputin is gone, the evil power that has ensnared the minds of the Tsar and his wife will be broken." And, by the way, if you're curious, there's actually an interview with Felix Yusupov on YouTube, recorded when he was already very old, where he describes the night of the murder himself. Of course, as the saying goes, memory can play tricks. And Felix changed the details more than once over the course of his life. It's also worth noting this wasn't the only group plotting Rasputin's death. At least 3 other aristocratic circles, entirely separate from each other, had similar plans, which just goes to show how deeply and widely this man was hated. The conspirators lured Grigori to the Yusupov palace under the pretext of introducing him to Felix's wife, Irina, famously one of the most beautiful women in the Russian Empire. At first, they led him into the basement, telling him she was upstairs entertaining guests and would join them shortly. There, they offered him cakes and wine, laced with potassium cyanide. Rasputin tasted them, but didn't die. At that point, it became clear poison wouldn't do the job, so Felix shot him. Rasputin collapsed unconscious. Thinking the deed was done, the conspirators began planning their next steps, when suddenly Rasputin got up and ran. He made it all the way up the stairs and out into the courtyard, before being shot again and finally killed. Much like his life, Rasputin's death is also surrounded by myth and speculation. One theory suggests that the final, fatal shot was actually fired by a British intelligence officer, and that the entire assassination may have had foreign backing. In fact, the BBC released a documentary in 2004 titled Who Killed Rasputin, which points to Oswald Rayner, a British agent, as the real killer. Highly recommend checking that out if you're intrigued by this side of the story. Even after Rasputin was already dead, they reportedly continued to beat him for some time, just to be sure. Then, his body was wrapped and thrown into an ice hole in the Neva River. The next morning, on December 30th, passers-by noticed bloodstains on the railings near the Yusupov palace, and one of Rasputin's boots lying nearby. Around that same time, his family began to panic. He hadn't returned home. On January 1st, his lifeless body was finally pulled from the river. There was hardly any need for an investigation. By the next morning, all of St. Petersburg already knew exactly whose house Rasputin had visited that night. Public celebration was overwhelming. People hugged in the streets, gathered outside the Yusupov palace where he'd been killed, and, believe it or not, knelt right there on the pavement. But not to pray for his soul, to give thanks for his death. The only place where Rasputin's death was truly grieved was within the walls of the imperial palace. Empress Alexandra was devastated. She demanded harsh punishment for those responsible. But the rest of the Romanov family had a different opinion. Many of them rushed to defend the assassins. One of the Tsar's uncles even wrote to the Dowager Empress, Nicholas's mother, saying, "The first one has been dealt with. Now it's time to remove the second," meaning Alexandra. He suggested placing her in a convent, or even an asylum. Even Alexandra's own sister, Grand Duchess Elizabeth, a woman later canonized as a saint, wrote a thank you letter to Felix Yusupov's mother, praising her son's patriotic act. In the end, none of the conspirators faced any real consequences. Tsar Nicholas himself reportedly said, "It shouldn't matter if a prince or a peasant is killed. Justice must be served." But justice never came. And 2 months later, the revolution began, and the empire had far bigger problems. When I think about all of this, it really shows just how much tension was boiling under the surface in Russia at that time. Because no matter how hated a person may have been, murder is still a line. And even the aristocracy seemed to have lost its sense of boundaries. It's a brutal end, even for someone as controversial and disliked as Grigori Rasputin. And what strikes me most is how desperately people always want someone to blame. Looking back, it's obvious Rasputin wasn't the cause of the revolution. Maybe the last straw, but certainly not the root. The crisis in Russia had been building for generations. Rasputin himself, as if sensing his end was near, left a prophecy addressed to Tsar Nicholas II. "When you hear the bell tolling for Grigori's death, know this: If it was your relatives who killed me, not one of your family, neither your children nor your kin, will live more than 2 years. And that prophecy did come true. 1 year and 7 months later, and in a chilling, almost mystical coincidence, on the very same date, during the night of July 16th to 17th, the Romanov family was executed. Russia had switched to the Gregorian calendar by then, but if we count the dates according to the old Julian calendar, Rasputin himself had also been murdered on the night of the 16th to the 17th. And so, on that same night, in the basement of a house in Yekaterinburg, the family of Russia's last emperor, Nicholas II, was shot. And so, no matter what spiteful gossipers or disco hits might suggest, Rasputin and Empress Alexandra were not lovers nor villains. To me, their story is simply the story of two people caught in the collapse of an empire. A woman, a mother, shattered by grief, willing to believe in anything that might save her child. And a man, just a man, who rose far too high and eventually lost control of the very forces he stirred. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments, and see you in the next video.